Jordan, welcome to the Easy Conversations podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm looking forward to our discussion. We've been able to chat and you're got your fingers in a lot of different things.
That's
So
true.
hoping that some of it, but the biggest one I think we touched on last week was, and it's at the forefront right now, obviously, as artificial intelligence or AI continues to advance, there's a lot of information coming at us, and people are starting to freak out about how good it is. I've seen some of those videos that have been on there through OpenAI, and it's just mind blowing in terms of how good the
Yeah.
quality is. But from the perspective of what we want to talk about today is more so on the therapeutic side and the advancement that AI is doing in providing therapy. And there's been a lot of chatter around if that is appropriate or will it replace therapists because of the convenience and the low cost. But I'm sure we're going to touch on all of those things. And before we do, I do want to give you an opportunity to share with the listeners a little bit about yourself, who you are, and what's brought you here today.
Great. Yeah, there's quite a lot on the table there. First,
Yes.
I'm really happy to be here. Big fan of the podcast. It's a real honor. I am primarily the founder and clinical director of a boutique psychotherapy practice in Manhattan called Lexington Park Psychotherapy. And outside of that, I do some consulting work and primarily some academic work with a couple of co-authors. Yeah, that's most of it.
Yeah. And I am curious, like, I know you mentioned last week, but you're also doing a bunch of research. Are you able to
Right.
touch on some of the research work you're doing and what areas you're primarily focused on?
Yeah, the research is that's good for bringing that up. So the research is a little bit dispersed, or it's diffuse in some respects. So probably the bulk of my work is in the philosophy of medicine and philosophical issues having to do with neurodiversity. Right now, that's a big
Mm.
thing. The rising rates of autism, and so I do a lot of work in neurodiversity. What the concept of disorder means actually bears quite a lot on that. And I do some philosophical and medical ethical work around that. As well, I do some more theoretical work on 19th century German philosophy, primarily Nietzsche and Schopenhauer. So I'm very interested in that period.
Yeah.
Partially, however, because that's a really interesting area where philosophy starts to splinter off into what we now know as psychology and then clinical psychology as well. So it's a really rich time, I think, for both philosophy and psychology.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that. And I do share some of that interest as well. But there's something you're talking about that immediately piqued my interest. So let's talk about disorders
Sure.
because that has become quite the thing now, right? So you can easily go and get diagnosed and get a label of a disorder, which I mean, I work in the addiction side of
Right,
things
right.
and one of the clinical directors I work with. And I agree with his perspective that the labeling can also become
Yes.
problematic. So I do want to get your thoughts. And then the other piece you touched on was the rise in rates of autism. And I wonder if that's always been there, but are we trying to over label, over diagnose things? Because people seem to function well up to 100 years ago before there were all these diagnoses and symptoms that we tend to look for now. And obviously the DSM-5 is significantly based on that.
Right.
But yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. So the place that I think to begin with this is what does the concept disorder mean? Right. So there's this interesting thing. So the flu or a broken bone or a poisoning or schizophrenia or depression or ADHD, in principle, all of these should have the same commonality that they're all disorders. So the question is, what does that mean? So I work with Professor Jerome Wakefield, and he has analyzed the concept of disorder in what is considered the most clinically relevant way, and frankly, the most, I think, robust and correct way. Personally, I believe that. And that is the harmful dysfunction analysis. And so he claims that there needs to be two components. In order for something to be a disorder, there are two necessary and sufficient criteria, and that is it needs to be a dysfunction, where dysfunction is understood as the failure of some feature of the organism to perform the function for which it evolved by natural selection. So that's important, that
Mm-hmm.
it fails in the way that it fails to function as it was intended to evolve, the reason why it evolved. So your heart contributes to your overall weight, and it's got
Mm-hmm.
a, I don't know, planetary pull on Jupiter or something like this, but that's not why it evolved. It evolved to pump blood. And so if it doesn't contribute to your overall weight for some magical reason, it hasn't in the way
Mm-hmm.
that is relevant.
Yeah.
But in addition to the dysfunction requirement, it also needs to be harmful. And so there's a couple of examples that you can see this with. So for instance, in order to see the dysfunction requirement, why that's required, consider illiteracy and
Mm-hmm.
dyslexia. So both of these have the exact same phenotype, can't read. But illiteracy it's an educational and social problem. Right? We were all illiterate before we learned to read.
Right.
Um, but the most plausible etiology of dyslexia that I'm aware of is that there's some damage to the corpus callosum that is
Mm-hmm.
preventing the two hemispheres from interacting, which
Mm-hmm.
is required for reading. And so, even though they both are harmful in the exact same way, dyslexia is additionally a dysfunction, some failure of the feature of the organism to perform what it was evolved to
Yep.
perform. And so it seems like dysfunction is really required. So then, what about
Mm-hmm.
the harm criterion? So the example that I give here is that I have a little red dot on my abdomen, and it's a benign angioma. And a benign angioma is just a capillary that really is meant to attach to another capillary.
Mm-hmm.
And mine attaches to a skin cell, but it doesn't
Right.
itch. It doesn't hurt. It's not associated with any other morbidity. It's totally benign. And so it's definitely a dysfunction. It was meant to attach to another capillary, but it's totally harmless as well. So
Mm-hmm.
nobody really considers it a disorder.
Mm-hmm.
So it's by those criteria that we have to examine every disorder that you see, every disorder in the DSM, every disorder that you see in a hospital.
Mm-hmm.
If it doesn't have either or both of those criteria, then it might be a harmless dysfunction or a harmful non-dysfunction,
Right.
both of which are just part of the furniture of the world. There's nothing to do
Yes.
about them.
Yeah.
So when we think about autism, autism is an extremely overdiagnosed category. Part of this was that there was autism in DSM-4, and then they expanded that. They deleted the Asperger's syndrome, which was a more mild form of autism, and they expanded the autism spectrum in DSM-5 to be autism spectrum disorder. Now, it's really it seems as though, anyway, the data seems as though the autism, what we might call classic autism, which I can understand why people might object to that, but just to use a term here, that seems to have remained constant. And the tail, that long spectrum of autism, where children or adults have average or above average intelligence, but might have some more mild social constraints or anxieties, but can generally live on their own, that has really started doubling and tripling. And that's where we're seeing a lot of concern about these increasing prevalence rates. So it's a question about whether that long tail of autism, that the whole spectrum, is really a disorder. And
Mm-hmm.
interestingly, there's a movement right now, the neurodiversity movement,
Yes.
and they have a kind of they have a very mild, a moderate, and extreme claim. The mild claim is that there's been some DSM diagnostic overreach. The extreme claim is that the entire category of autism, as well as many other categories, are non-disordered. And the moderate claim is that autism exists, but the diagnostic overreach is a little bit larger. And I consider myself in agreement with that moderate neurodiversity claim.
Yeah. Yeah. It's become pretty common, right? The neurodiversity movement for sure. And what are your thoughts about ADHD? Because we touched on that, or I touched on it earlier. But so before you answer that too, I am curious because you said the two things to look at. Is there a dysfunction and is it harmful?
Yeah.
Now, do you feel we could fall into a place where by overdiagnosing, we can create the harmful effect as opposed to it may not be there to begin with? And how do you reconcile that?
Can you just put a few more words on that? I'm not
Yeah,
sure
of
I quite
course.
guess.
Well, I
Yeah.
think my view at times is by labeling something as a disorder, you might be creating more harmful effects because then people will look at themselves like, oh, I have this disorder.
Oh,
Yeah. So
I
you'd
think
be
that's exactly.
contributing to the harmful effects.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. It's a slightly orthogonal to the question about the disorder itself, right?
Yes.
Because the harm comes from, that's an iatrogenic harm that's coming from the medical establishment rather
Yes.
than from the dysfunction, which is required for the HDA
Yes.
harms. But I couldn't agree with you more. There's a way that sometimes, not always, but sometimes people can feel that having a disorder is an excuse or a way out
Mhm.
of certain responsibilities, maybe social responsibilities. It's oftentimes an explanation, but it's very rarely a justification.
Mhm.
And the example that I like to give is if you are colorblind, that doesn't give you license to run through red lights.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, you just, truly unfortunately, in a totally unfair way, just a roll of the dice, you just have been saddled with this additional responsibility that many other people don't have. And you have to figure it out. And so it is with people who are depressed and people with severe social anxieties. It's it's very tricky. Now, if you're orienting to your social anxiety as though everybody else has to make an accommodation, that can be tricky. I am very sympathetic. There was a long period of time in the United States, I know you're Canadian, but there's a period of time prior to 1990, and actually even a bit after 1990, where people were not required, where businesses were not required to have wheelchair ramps.
Mhm.
And the idea, I suppose, was that if your legs didn't work, then you couldn't be an attorney. Now, I think the line that some disability rights advocates reused is that when the world isn't slanted against us, then we can actually achieve great things. Couldn't agree with you more. Couldn't
Yes.
agree with you more. There's just some daylight between, I think, some conceptual daylight between adding ramps places and requiring, for instance, for many people with social deficits, as many people with autism have, getting rid of social implicature so that things become a little bit easier to read. This actually
Mhm.
started to become a problem, I think, when some people were demanding it, but it's such an essential part of our communication patterns and
Yes.
that I don't know that you can get rid of it.
Yeah. And the other thing you'd mentioned was the politics involved in psychotherapy. And I
Yeah.
mean, there's been a lot of controversial conversations around the whole statement made by RFK and promoted by President Trump around
Right.
Tylenol causing autism for pregnant women and babies. So, is that a factor as well when you look at politics and psychotherapy, or is there? I mean, I'm assuming there's more to it, but are you able to shed light on?
Well, with regard to that, it's a great question. There's two parts to it in a way. With regards, I really do think that, candidly, that RFK has completely lost his mind with this pursuit. They're not going to get anywhere. And a big part of the reason why they're not going to get anywhere, I think, is that the rise in prevalence among within is made up. What I mean by that, I should be careful about this, but again, there is this classic form of autism, and that's remained relatively common or constant rather. And the rises in autism prevalence are do look more like a non-disordered subset of people with more mild autistic traits. Now, again, it's not a disorder to be a little socially awkward. It's not a disorder to be uncomfortable in social settings or to struggle to communicate.
Mhm.
If you don't really like looking people in the eyes, that's very different from being incapable of doing that. And so I think RFK is out on a hunt to find what rise in prevalence rates are, but I actually think that it's more likely than not a problem of overdiagnosis. My concern, however, with politics, this is the second part of that, the answer to this question. The concern with the way that politics interacts with psychotherapy actually comes from almost the opposite direction.
Mhm.
There's been more and more reports about psychotherapists being uncomfortable working with people who have political views that or values that are different from them, and either refusing to work with them and referring them to other therapists, or even saying some pretty nasty things to them in the session. I
Mm.
wrote a paper. The paper was really sparked because I met somebody who said that their therapist scolded them at one point for political reasons. And I thought, what an awful abdication of your role as a mental health provider.
Mm.
And to my great surprise, this was actually a controversial opinion to take.
Mm.
Therapists should remain politically neutral and work toward alleviating their patients' distress.
Mhm.
Again, I thought that would have been almost rejected as a paper because it seemed so straightforward.
Right.
Unfortunately, it's not.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you can make the case that besides politics, religious views can also come
Mhm.
in a similar vein. And I think in general, if your client is making personal choices that don't align with your values, that can also be a point of contention. But that's where I think that countertransference piece is so important and thyself in a way too, right?
Exactly right. Yeah.
But yeah, I think to your point, not only I could see and I've heard besides politics, even religious views can be a bit of a trigger for the provider and the therapist.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's right. And it's not as though therapists are required to work with any particular person at all. The distinction that I make, so when I was a young man, several of my friends died, actually premature deaths from substance use related deaths, substance use related reasons. And very much as a result of that, I don't work with people who have substance use related disorders. Now, the distinction I want to draw there, and I think that's perfectly defensible. And the reason why is because I don't hate anybody with a substance use disorder. My heart goes out to them. My problem is that I wouldn't be giving them an adequate standard of care.
Mm.
I know that it would be very difficult for me to sit across from them and not at some point just want to beg them to stop. And
Yes.
whatever that is, that's not therapy, and that person deserves therapy. And so it is. It's the same. You can imagine some a therapist with children not wanting to work with a sex offender, a child sex offender, and you might imagine that somebody wouldn't want to work with who's been subject of personal violence, not wanting to work with a mandated
Yes.
violent abuser. Perfectly understandable. But once it becomes about political opprobrium, once you find somebody just bad, rather than being unable, rather than it being a weakness within you, I certainly think it's a weakness in my practice. It's a
Mhm.
weakness in my ability that I'm unable to work with that population.
Yeah.
Um, but that's the distinction I hope to draw. I really loathe the idea that politics could interfere so much with a medical discipline like this.
Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah, and it's unfortunately that can get in the way, and that's I believe the nature of the field too, right? You don't see in a lot of places of work where people are openly sharing their views.
Yes.
There's certain social rules or unspoken rules around in many settings. You don't get into discussions around politics or religion because that can be triggering for many people and can
That's right.
create fireworks. So it is one of those spaces where you just come in as a individual where you're hoping to be seen and where you can be vulnerable and open. That's supposed to be a safe space. But to your point, if you're being scolded by your therapist, then it's having the opposite effect.
That's exactly right. Therapy should be a place where you can bring in the parts of yourself that you're most ashamed of and not worry about whether it aligns with the medical professional across from you, and that you can really just seek professional help as well. It's a real danger. Our field has had a really shameful history of allowing kind of politics to masquerade as psychotherapy or medical advice. And the idea that we're doing it again means that we're allowing psychotherapy to become the kind of medical wing of a political machine. Even if you agree with the politics, you shouldn't want to sacrifice the legitimacy of
Mhm.
psychotherapy in order to achieve it.
Yeah, for sure. I agree. So let's maybe jump into speaking of politics and difficult issues. Let's maybe talk about AI
Absolutely.
and where do you see this going and what are your thoughts?
Very broad to begin with. I tried to carve a middle ground. So there's a lot of naysayers about it, and the naysayers tend to take two forms, which is either it'll never be able to do what we do, or I don't want it to do what we do.
Mm,
And the naysayers seem to think it'll, we don't need, let's just, let's get started right away. Let's just forget humans. Let's just hit the ground running. And my feeling is it's actually going to be, at least it holds the promise, AI holds the promise of inaugurating a kind of mental health revolution, like a revolution in the way that that are able to treat people. The reality is that huge swaths of the world, huge swaths of the United States are in treatment deserts.
mhm,
They're either geographically removed or otherwise they just cannot access a psychotherapist or psychiatrist. And that's devastating. So even among people that would want to see therapists, they can't. Right? So if you're able to create the language is a DMHI, a digital mental health intervention, and distribute that widely, that could save millions and millions of lives. That would, or add to their what's called quality adjusted life years. It
mm.
would improve people's lives incredibly if you could provide good, safe, and efficacious treatment. That we should all be hoping, every therapist in the world, every person should be rooting for AI psychotherapy because the promise it holds is just so large.
Yeah.
The concerns that I have are that currently it is inefficacious. The safety data is abysmal. That at the level of actual use, there are downstream consequences to people using it and the way people use it.
Mm.
And then at the kind of post deployment or institutional stage, regulations, particularly in the United States, and actually there was something we can get into it, some issue, in, I believe it was Alberta, but they're just a terrible. The EU is starting to make the right moves, but even there, it's just so the regulatory oversight is terrible. And then finally, I have philosophical and conceptual concerns that I don't think will obviate um, its need or its use, but it does diminish the number of people that will be interested, I think, in using AI psychotherapy.
Mm.
So I'm happy to get started in any one of
Yeah.
those categories.
No, I appreciate all that. So you talked about safety data. Are you able to expand on what that means and what these downstream consequences, at least in the
Absolutely.
early stages, what are we seeing?
Yeah. Okay. So in terms of the safety data, my concern about the safety data is that it's largely not there. So recent
Mm,
meta-analyses have looked for uh, meta-analyses on outcome studies. These are this new AI program, does it work for depression? And then they look at these studies, depression or anxiety, or does it work for groups or whatever? And they look for safety data, and over a third of them didn't report any. Well, that's concerning,
mm,
right? And then different meta-analyses looked at many other ones, many other studies, and found that the safety data that was reported wasn't using the same metrics. And it made it very difficult to compare them. it's very hard to say that one was safer than the other or what metrics are being used in the first
Mhm.
place. And that's worrisome
Mm.
because it's really haphazard. That refers, that kind of gestures towards some of the regulatory problems. But part of the reason why they're able to get around this is that there's two kind of conventional categories. These are health apps, and then wellness apps.
Mm.
And the idea is that if you're a wellness app, this could just be journaling or helping you jog.
Right.
But if you can get categorized as a wellness app, then you don't really have to provide much efficacy or safety data, because if you're a journaling app, what would it be? What safety data do you
Right.
need to provide? But if you're encouraging people to make changes in their life or reconsider the way that they're interacting with their significant other or loved ones, you can really do damage to somebody's life. And safety data is needed. And there's been some evidence that some psychotherapy apps are actively pursuing that wellness categorization to get out of having to provide information that they really probably ought to be providing.
Right.
So that's where we get to the safety stuff. Where we get to some of the downstream consequences, well, I guess there's a few. One is that some, okay, I'm just trying to organize this. So one of the issues is that if you have a relationship with a therapist, your relationship is to a human therapist, I'm sorry,
Yes.
then it's always difficult to remember to say the human part, but
Mhm.
then your relationship, it's me to you, and the therapist is responsible, has all of the information about their practice, and they're responsible to you. And so it's bi-directional. If your relationship is to a non-human psychotherapist, a digital psychotherapist, you have a relationship to it, but it
Right.
has no relationship to you. The entity that has a relationship to you is the company that owns the intellectual property.
Mhm.
And so one major concern is that if that company decides to shift focus, if it has some legal troubles, if it decides to go just use its programming or even just change the programming, actually, then overnight your therapist might just disappear.
Mm.
And that actually happened to people. There was an app. It was called, I want to say Karen AI. There was an influencer named Karen. I don't know the details about her, but
Yeah.
it was organized so that it was almost a relationship. It was supposed to be a romantic relationship that you had with this woman, but it advertised having elements of CBT and DBT
Mm.
in it as well. I can't verify whether it actually did, but that's how it advertised. Another point about the regulation. But then I need to wrap this around a lot of allegedly, because I'm not trying to
Mhm.
get in any trouble with you, but allegedly the CEO was arrested for arson or something. And overnight, the Karen AI app was deleted, essentially. Now, listen, whatever you want to say about people forming emotional relationships and romantic relationships with AI devices, they are, and
Yep.
they're meaningful. And the emotional toll that it takes on somebody to really care about somebody and then have them kidnapped essentially overnight,
Yes.
that'd be devastating. I feel for these people. And
Mm.
so we should worry about that.
Yeah.
There's another downstream consequence, however, and it's escaping me at the moment, but oh, I'm so sorry. Another downstream consequence, and this is something that I'm actually quite worried about. Right now, the vast predominance of AI psychotherapy apps that employ some version of cognitive behavioral therapy.
Mm.
Cognitive behavioral therapy is a terrific psychotherapeutic method. It's widely substantiated evidentially. It's major institutions promoted for common disorders, and it can be very helpful. So there's a kind of plausible deniability around this for all of those reasons. But I'm actually convinced that part of the reason, a part, why
Yeah.
it is so disproportionately represented in the app marketplace is because it's very regimented. CBT is very operational, and it's very easy to program something. It's basically pre-programmed.
Right.
CBT and certain strict models are basically pre-programmed. Discrete tasks, discrete techniques, homework assignments. You compare that to something like play therapy or psychodynamic psychotherapies or interpersonal psychotherapy, which all of those are basically underrepresented. Sorry, all of them are underrepresented.
Mm.
Most of those play therapy, I don't think there is a play therapy app, but they just aren't represented. And it's not because their efficacy is so low. Psychodynamic psychotherapy, in many cases, shows the equal efficacy, depression, anxiety to CVT. And so the downstream consequence of this, the worry that I have about this is that it's plausible that different psychotherapeutic modalities work along different mental pathways.
Yes.
And analogous to non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. And so if there's something that can be best addressed through conscious restructuring, CBTs, that's the way to go. But there are certain things that involve kind of family structures.
Yes.
And maybe family therapy or internal family systems is better. And so on. And if that's the case, then it seems like if CBT is what is used for AI psychotherapy, then only those who get AI psychotherapy will get, or rather, those who get AI psychotherapy will only be able to receive CBT, or really mostly only be able to receive CBT. And that means that there might be mental conditions that are the unique province of lower classes or something. If you can only get an AI psychotherapist in certain sub-Saharan regions or in certain regions of the world where you're at a geographic remove from a psychotherapist who can give you psychodynamic or IFS or ACT, then you have to get CBT. If you have to get CBT, then there might be some conditions that are recalcitrant. And that would really that would really exacerbate an already stratified healthcare system.
Yeah.
That's a terrible outcome.
Yeah. Yeah. So I do want to pick up on that, to ground the listeners too, because you were talking about meta-analyses, and just for clarity, it's basically looking at several studies along the same topic. Yeah. So I think with respect to the safety data, looking at multiple studies in the same field and not finding any safety data, that's where the concern, as you've highlighted, is, because it's consistent. So it's not just one study. So there's that piece. And then as you're talking about the limitations around modalities, do you feel like over time the systems can get more sophisticated where they may be able to provide additional modalities? But that is also a risk, because right now, as we speak, people are using AI for therapy.
Yes. So a resounding yes to everything you said. I do think AI is going to get better. Everything that I just said, the safety data is going to get better.
Yes.
The regulations, one hopes, gets better.
Yes.
Certainly the technology is going to get better. And the technology, I can't say when, but when I would be foolish to think, there's some people still clutching onto psychotherapy saying, AI will never be able to do this. It reminds me, there was a talk, there's a brilliant philosopher who's recently passed, actually. His name is Daniel Dennett. And he said, people used to say that computers could never play chess.
Yep.
And now, of course, computers far outstrip us. And then we said, computers will never be able to produce art. And of course, now we see it can actually create beautiful works of art. And he says, the next thing that they're going to say is that computers will never have intuition. And what is intuition? Intuition is just not knowing how you got to an answer. So what you do is you program a computer so that when you ask it, what's 2 plus 2? It says 4. You say, how'd you figure that out? It'll just say, I don't know. Bad, yeah, intuition. And so the thing is, it really is just going to get to the point where it has cleverness and this kind of ability. I don't doubt that. The thing is that I do think that this is what I alluded to earlier, and this gets us into the weeds of philosophy of mind, but there is a ontological restriction or inability, impairment, you might think, within digital programs. And so, again, I need to detour through philosophy of mind for a moment in order to make this salient. But so it seems as though there's two types of stuff in the world. It seems as though there's stuff that is like this desk or my head or even neurons and electrons. And they all seem to have the same two necessary and sufficient criteria that are properties, and that's that they have mass and take up space.
Mm-hmm.
And mental stuff doesn't seem like it does have either of those. Your anxiety isn't 6 inches long.
Right.
And mental stuff does seem to have two necessary and sufficient properties of its own that are exclusive of physical stuff. And these are technical terms. It's qualia and intentionality. Qualia just means that there's an experience to it. Or as Thomas Nagel put it, there's something that it's like to be. So there's nothing that it's like to be this desk. There's nothing that it's like to be a neuron. But when you take a sip of water or when you wake up, there's an experience that you have.
Yes.
There's an experience you have of just being you. And that's interesting. We don't know how we get from the brain to that because somehow we come from physical stuff and that occurs.
Mm-hmm.
But we know that physical stuff doesn't have that. We know that computers don't have that. And it doesn't seem like if you add more complexity to it, it doesn't seem like experience necessarily comes on for the ride.
Mm-hmm.
So that's qualia. The other thing is intentionality. Intentionality means that there's some meaning or propositional content to your thoughts. The easiest way to explain this, I think, is with John Searle's famous thought experiment, Chinese room. He says, imagine that you're sitting in a room and there's a slit on the left side of the room and a slit on the right side. Into the left slit, somebody has written some squiggles on it. And your job is to take that squiggled note card and look quickly in a book. And the book says, if you see this squiggle, write this squabble. And so you write this squabble and then you hand it out the right slit on the right side of the room. And you just do that. You get very good at this. You do this for 10 years. You can look through this book very quickly. And then one day you get let out of the room and somebody says, do you know Chinese?
Mm.
Of course, you don't know what any of those words mean. But yet you've been performing as good as a native Chinese speaker in translating these or in answering the Chinese questions.
Mm.
And so it is. That is exactly what John Searle's point was. That is exactly what digital programs do. You hand it some input, it runs through some manual, and then it dishes out some output. So there's no meaning in it. It doesn't understand meaning, so it doesn't know anything. So all of this is just to say, these are limitations inherent to digital programs. Everything else I've said, it seems like that's going to get resolved at some point. We've got very talented, very clever programmers and thinkers, brilliant people working on this, and it will yield to their efforts.
Yeah.
But there is no way. Researchers have been working on these two issues, the problem of qualia. I mean, in cognitive science and philosophy, the problem of qualia is known as the hard problem.
Mm.
It's the hard problem. The problem of intentionality is known as the second hardest problem.
Yeah.
And so I don't think that can be resolved, or I certainly am not going to resolve it. And the issue is if you're going to therapy, imagine if you have a substance use disorder and you're going to a group therapy and you walk in and to a certainty that every other person in that room is actually a machine. And they've never had a substance use problem. And they're making up stories that they might be very realistic, but they're not true. It'd be very hard to imagine anybody voluntarily doing that.
Yeah.
Or benefiting from it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that kind of brings up the whole question of consciousness, then I think on it, because I asked our friend Ari Block the question, does AI have consciousness? And his response was, humans don't have it. That very Ari.
Disagree with Ari on that.
Yeah. But so that has been quite the debate. Will AI get to that point? And I don't know, to be honest. I don't think so. But how does this fit into the whole therapeutic standpoint as well when you look at AI serving a purpose to some degree?
Yeah, the thing is that it's very funny. I should just say, Ari's a wonderful guy. There's nothing that we know more certainly, with more certainty than that we're each conscious. I know that I'm conscious.
Yeah.
Now, I have no idea about the rest of the world, but I find that position very funny. But with regard to AI, I think there's a way in which it doesn't matter, or that it won't matter for many people. I think many people will just, when I take an aspirin, I don't care if it's conscious or not. If you told me it's consciously helping me kind of resolve my headaches, it wouldn't contribute to me taking it one iota. I just want symptom remediation.
Right.
And I am certain that many people would just say, hey, I don't care. I just want the symptoms to go away.
Yeah.
And great. That's wonderful. Fantastic. But I also know that many other people will care that the thing across from them, for all of its sophistication, for all of its abilities, despite the ability that it might even have to reduce their symptoms, simply aren't going to want to engage with a product that can't actually think any more than a calculator.
Mhm.
Calculator isn't thinking when it gives you the outcome, or something that doesn't actually feel. Again, this isn't to say that it's not going to be able to depict
Yes.
feelings or depict thinking, and even in a very convincing way.
Yeah.
I think that it will. I just think that there's going to be something that's going to be preventing people from electively choosing to engage with something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing I think for me over the years, what's been valuable in the relationships I've cultivated, whether it's even in my marriage too, is having another person identifying my blind spots.
Right.
And a lot of the times therapy has been helpful in that sense too. Now, the other criticism, if you want to call it that, for AI, and I've definitely observed it too, is the confirmation bias. So a lot of people like that. So then is that behavior
That's why
then
it's
being
there.
reinforced? And they're like, hey, this AI thing is really helping me get better. Meanwhile, it's reinforcing their behavior through the confirmation bias. And maybe you're not walking away getting a different perspective, which therapy often offers.
Yeah, I mean, this is a real concern. So ChatGPT recently made a shift away from that, but it was for a period of time, it was offering very cloying and supportive advice. And that was actually encouraging some people to get off their medications or to believe their certain delusions.
Mm.
It's very worrisome. Therapy at its best should be challenging and not just blindly affirming. But for all of that, I will admit there are some therapists that practice, some human therapists, I should say,
Yes.
that practice in a very kind of blindly affirming way. So the concern that I have, I nevertheless think that's a very good
Mm.
critique of AI. And the reason why is the scale.
Yes.
If we're distributing this, again, remember that the promise of AI, the benefit, the real benefit of AI, the reason to use it is because it can reach millions of people, whereas therapists just
Mm-hmm.
can't.
Mm-hmm.
And if one therapist is doing a bad job, which is bad, I don't support that, obviously, but
Mm.
they're doing a bad job to 30 people, 40 people max. 40 people, it seems way too much, actually, but 30 people max. And
Yeah.
if AI is programmed incorrectly, just the scale of the damage it could do is just incredible. This is
Mm-hmm.
part of the concern as well, where when you think about, there are values that get implicitly coded into the programming.
Mm-hmm.
And if these are exclusively coming from Palo Alto or Hamburg or something like this, and then distributed across the world, that's not ideal. And
Yeah.
that there's a way in which, just as an example from one of these papers, There is a Muslim community in a rural area known as Paponi. I believe it's in Burkina Faso. And in that village, the wives would prefer, if the husband is attracted to somebody, to not get married to her, to have a kind of an affair. It's understood, but they prefer it to have an affair. And but whereas in many, and there's for financial reasons involved with
Yeah.
that. And there's many other Muslim communities in Africa that feel exactly the opposite, that it's part of your duties to get married prior to any sexual relationship.
Hmm.
Imagine that a single AI is being used for couples therapy or even for an individual across these two communities or these many communities. Imagine if it were to say something like, think about your responsibilities to your wife. Within a certain kind of community, it would be very different. So then you imagine transporting that to, I don't know, Scandinavia or something. What would it look like?
Yeah.
So again, the scale is different.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. And just, you'd mentioned earlier around the whole romantic relationship
Yes.
piece with AI, for example. One of the things I've observed, and it's been talked about quite a bit, that people in general are a lot more disconnected than
Yes.
ever before on a social level. Obviously, you can
Yeah.
make the argument that technologically they're more connected, but there is that sense of disconnection and lacking connection with people in general and the social piece there. So what I'm getting at is it's easy to isolate even more and find that sense of connection in the digital form where, to your point, it is a one-way relationship, but that could also be reinforcing in the sense that, hey, I don't have to put in any effort into this, but I'm
That's
getting what
exactly right.
my needs met. So this is pretty good.
That's exactly right. This is a kind of downstream consequence that takes us out of the psychotherapy realm proper, but there's a kind of cottage industry of creating relationship apps that again are very appealing to many young men.
Yes.
And they, among the many things that they might be learning while engaging with this app, I don't know, but among these would be something like, this thing's always available, right? So your AI girlfriend, it's always ready to talk to you whenever you want. It it will never say no to your requests or whatever. 2 a.m. and you want to start talking, it's there. It's really built for you, which is radically asymmetric to human relationships, where you might have to do something that you really don't want to do
Mm,
because that's what compromise is. You
yes.
know what I mean? And
Yeah.
that where you might really want to talk to somebody and you can't. You have to wait because they're at work or they're doing something. You're not the center of their life. And so there's a generation of people who are getting used to the idea that I actually don't need to wait. I don't need to regulate my own emotions. I don't need to compromise. This thing is going to do all the hard work for me. It's going to be there for me no matter what. It's going to do whatever I say, 24/7 access. That's just not realistic and it's not good training for human social interactions. So sometimes these things are advertised as
Mm,
helping to cure a loneliness epidemic. There's recently things all over New York subways, it's like the Friend app or something like this. It's a necklace that people wear and you can talk to it and it'll watch movies with you and whatever. And again, it's totally dystopian,
yeah.
not only because it's essentially advertising our increasing alienation from ourselves and each other, but also because this is not at all how human relationships work.
Hmm.
And in the way that human relationships work, in all of the ways that are not like this, those are features, not
Yes.
bugs. They help us become more regulated and better versions of ourselves.
Hmm.
So, excuse me, don't worry about that kind of stuff.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. And do you feel that men are more susceptible to something like this, or it could affect both men and women equally?
Gosh, it certainly seems currently, like, men are much more susceptible to these relationship type apps.
Mm.
So, yeah, they do seem to target young men, and men do seem to be currently more attracted to them. But I imagine that there's some way that they could start attacking women's brains in the way that
Yeah.
they're attacking men's.
Yeah, and
Maybe
I
they
think
are, and I'm just not seeing it as much. No.
yeah, and I think that there's many reasons to that. I think that's probably a separate debate and be to have it another time. But I think in general, based on how you're explaining it, and this is what I see too, and this probably captures in essence our entire conversation thus far, but the lack of resilience that I see
Yeah.
in society today and not encouraging people to do the hard things.
Yeah, I
And
think
that
that's right.
comes at a cost, and you lose meaning in life. And there's something to be said about doing something hard and getting to the other side of it, irrespective of what the outcome is. And seeing that's being taken away from people and the younger generation for sure. What are your thoughts around that?
Gosh, I have only too many thoughts. I'm going to just bloviate at you forever if you let me. Not so long ago, or I guess quite a while ago, they do this every now and then. They asked millennials, this was, I don't know, it was probably 10, 15 years ago at this point. I say not so long ago. Time flies. They asked millennials, would you rather have a job you hate or no job at all? And 50% of them said no job at all.
Mm.
And older generations really scoffed at this. And there's no work ethic. These people suck. Millennials were terrible, destroying the world. And the thing about that is, I'm sympathetic to the attitude, because if you work a job at McDonald's, it's a very difficult job, but it requires nothing distinctively about you. It requires nothing even human,
Mm.
right? A machine can do that job, but they're having a human do it. And so you're spending all of your time doing something, getting
Mhm.
paid terribly. You're getting rid of your time, so you can't do even the things that you care about.
Mhm.
And at the same time, there's this gigantic widening wealth gap. And so you're seeing from a distance, just over the horizon, you're seeing people with gigantic yachts and driving Bugattis and for young men, beautiful women and
Yeah.
all these kinds of things. And it's this chaotic party, and here you are stuck behind a fryer getting oil burns
Yeah.
and not getting paid. And I think that for many people, they're thinking, tell me again why I should go to college. Tell me again why I should work. What is the point of it? I think that there are good reasons to do it, but I think that there's AI is going to, it's already changing so much. But the example that I like to give is, suppose that somebody you love dies. Now go tell AI to go grieve for you.
Yeah.
Or you're religious, go tell AI to pray for you. Or the idea that you can offload your own personal development to anything else is a joke. But and so I think that I think that people essentially have become alienated from themselves and what it feels like to grow and develop and to meet a task that's difficult to work through to the other end,
Mm.
because there's an achievement on the other side. Because financially, that's really not always the case anymore.
Mm.
And even with things like college, I got a degree in philosophy. And so I'm not one to speak, but
Yeah.
you get a degree in philosophy and then you want to, I don't know, make money for your life. I mean, it's going to
Right.
be tricky for you. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's hard to say, hey, really work through it, because it's going to be on the other side. There's going to be something really good for you. Seeing a bunch of people sometimes look like they're not working that hard and having this crazy fun life. And again, it just doesn't seem like it's there for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think there is an aspect of philosophy that comes in, right? And when you read various people, you could see it. But I think what we've become accustomed to is the instant gratification, and everything is literally at our fingertips nowadays. So why work, right? If you can, instead of going over to the supermarket, you could just have it delivered to your doorstep
Not
quicker.
only, you're exactly right about that. There's a famous structure to good habits and bad habits.
Yes.
Right. If you, I don't know, chocolate cake tastes amazing right now. The moment that you eat it, it feels good.
Yes.
And it actually, there's nothing bad about eating chocolate cake. It's not going to harm you unless you do it a lot. And it's not going to harm you for, I don't know, 6 months, a year. The opposite is true for, if I went, I'm not much of a runner. I can't stand it. So if I went for a run today, it would add nothing to my health. It would
Hmm.
be, it was the only run that I've done in 6 months. It would, and it would waste 2 hours of my life and it would hurt. So it's painful now and it won't be helpful to me for another 6 months. So there are some things that are hard to do now and helpful 6 months from now. And
Mm.
there's some things that are incredible now and you
Hmm.
won't feel the pain of them for another
Yeah.
6 months. And that does make it hard to say, yeah, read that book. You go, oh, it's boring, but there's this flashing light in front of me that seems
Yes.
awesome.
Yeah. It reminds me of the concept that Dostoevsky illustrates in Notes from the Underground around utopia and how we would just shred ourselves to pieces. And I don't know if you're familiar with the Universe 25 experiments with the mice.
No.
I can't remember the experimenter's name, but basically he ran 25 iterations where he created a utopian world for these mice, and then they stopped mating and they just killed each other. So
Okay.
pretty interesting, but
That's interesting.
yeah,
I know of another study. There was a very famous study in 70s or 80s where they gave mice two water bottles. There's one filled with water and one filled with water laced with cocaine.
yeah,
And the mice, as soon as they found out about the cocaine water bottle, it was over. They just went to
yeah,
that well over and over until they overdosed and died. And researchers, I think I could be wrong about this, I think around 2010 in that era, said, well, that's interesting, but actually, that was just a bunch of mice in a cage. And that's
yeah,
actually not what life is like. And so they created a cage with like, lots of tubes and they connected to other families of
yep,
mice. And there were mice to mate with, and there was playgrounds so they could get exercise. And those mice, when they found the cocaine water bottle, they went to it once and they almost never went back to it.
hmm,
Now, that I think says quite a lot. If you can have meaning and fun and exploration in your life, then you'll take that over
yes,
these kind of deaths of despair. The problem again is that I think the world has been stacked in such a way that it's
hmm,
so difficult to get any of that meaning. You have to squeeze it out of life from the margins of your second job. I think it's very hard for people.
yeah, I agree. And here we are. But Jordan, I really appreciate the conversation. I thank you
My
for
pleasure.
your insights and everything you shared. I think there's what I'm taking out of it is we just need to be a bit more patient. There's more to come, but also be aware of everything around us and the choices we're making.
Right.
At the end of the day, I've been asked before, what do you teach or what do you hope to get across to your clients? And I think agency is one of the biggest things. I like to remind them that as much as life can feel like suffering, you still have agency. So I think that's what we're
Exactly
coming
right.
to in
Yeah,
terms of conclusion is that we all have agency despite everything going around us.
that's right.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, for
Such a
listeners that
pleasure.
want to learn more about you, your work, what are some ways they can do that?
Really, I'm a troglodyte when it comes to technology. My wife would laugh at me if I tried to promote anything Instagram or something. But I do have a website, Lexington Park Psychotherapy. All of my publications are up there. Many of them are open access. You can get them there, and as well as a blog and all of our press.
Awesome. We'll send the listeners that way, but thank you again. Had a blast.
Such a pleasure for Ken.
Yeah.
It was great.